Hi, I'm Julie again, still reading from Grimm's fairy tales. Today I'm going to be reading Briar Rose. You may recognize it as a slightly different story, maybe Sleeping Beauty. Let's get started. Briar Rose. A king and queen, once upon a long time ago, reigned in a country a great way off, where there were in those days fairies. Now this king and queen had plenty of money, and plenty of fine clothes to wear, and plenty of good things to eat and drink, and a coach to ride out in every day. But though they had been married many years, they had no children, and this grieved them very much. One day, as the queen was walking by the side of the river, at the bottom of the garden, she saw a poor little fish that had thrown itself out of the water. It lay there gasping and nearly dead on the bank. The queen took pity on this little fish and threw it back again into the river. And before it swam away, it lifted its head out of the water and said, "I know what your wish is, and it shall be fulfilled. In return for your kindness to me, you will soon have a daughter." What the little fish had foretold soon came to pass, and the queen had a little girl, so very beautiful that the king could not stop looking at this beautiful child with joy, and said he would hold a great feast and make merry, and show this child to all the land. So he asked his kinsmen and nobles and friends and neighbors. But the queen said, "I will also ask all the fairies in the land that they might be kind and good to our little daughter." Now, there were 13 fairies in the kingdom, but the king and the queen only had 12 golden dishes for them to eat out of. So they were forced to leave one of the fairies off of the list. So 12 fairies came, each with a red cap on her head and red shoes with high heels on her feet, with long white wands in their hands. After the feast was over, they gathered around in a ring and all gave their best gifts to the little princess. One gave her goodness, one gave beauty, another gave riches, and so on until they all gave all that was good in the world. Just as the 11th of them had done blessing her, a great noise was heard in the courtyard, and word was brought back that the 13th fairy had come, with a black cap on her head, and black shoes on her feet, and a broomstick in her hand, and presently she came up into the dining hall. Now, remember, she had not been asked to the feast, and she was very angry, and she scolded the king and the queen very much, and she set out to take work on revenge. And she cried out, "The king's daughter shall, in her 15th year, be wounded by a spindle and fall down dead." Then the 12th of the friendly fairies, who had not yet given her gift, came forward and said that the evil wish must be fulfilled, but that she could soften its mischief. So her gift was that the king's daughter, when the spindle wounded her, she would not really die, but only fall asleep for 100 years. However, the king still hoped to save his dear child altogether from the threatened evil, so he ordered that all of the spindles in the kingdom should be bought up and burnt. But all the gifts of the first 11 fairies were in the meantime fulfilled, for the princess was so very beautiful and well behaved and good and wise, everyone loved her dearly. It happened that on the very day that she was 15 years old, The king and the queen were not at home. She was left alone at the palace. She roved about all by herself, and she looked at all the rooms and all the chambers. She went way up high into a tower. There was a narrow staircase ending with just a little door. There was a little golden key in that door, and the door sprang open, and there was a little old lady spinning away busily. "Why, how now, good mother?" said the princess. "What are you doing there?" "Ah, just spinning," said the little old lady, and she nodded her head, just humming a tune, and went that spinning wheel. "How prettily that turns around," said the princess. The princess began to spin herself. It went around, but scarcely had she touched it before the fairy's prophecy was fulfilled, and that spinning spindle wounded her, and she fell down lifeless to the ground. However, she was not dead, but had only fallen into that deep sleep. And the king and the queen, who had just come home, and all of their court, fell asleep too. And the horses slept in the stables, and the dog in the court fell asleep, and the pigeons on the housetop fell asleep, and the very flies on the walls fell asleep. The fires in the hearth, blazing away, froze into sleep. The king's dinner stood still. The cook, who was at that moment pulling the kitchen boy by the hair to give him a box in the ear, for he had done something amiss, let him go, and they both fell asleep. The butler, who was slyly tasting his ale, fell asleep with the jug at his lips. Sound asleep. A large hedge of thorns soon grew around that palace, and every year it became higher and thicker, till at last the old palace was surrounded and hidden, so not even the roof or the chimneys could be seen. There went a report through all the land of that beautiful sleeping Briar Rose, for that's what the king's daughter was thereafter called. Several kings' sons came and tried to break through that thicket. However, none of them could ever break through, for the thorns and the bushes surrounding the palace grabbed hold of them with thorns as if they had hands, and stuck fast, and they died wretchedly. After many, many years, there came a king's son into that land, and an old man told him a story of the thicket of thorns, and how a beautiful palace stood behind it, and how a wonderful princess called Briar Rose lay in it asleep with all of her court. He told, too, how he had heard from his grandfather that many, many princes had come and tried to break through, but they had all stuck fast and died. The young prince said, "This does not frighten me. I will go and see this Briar Rose." The old man tried to stop him, but he was bent upon going. Now, that very day, the 100 years was ended, and the prince came to that thicket, and he saw nothing but beautiful flowering shrubs. He went through with ease, and they shut in behind him as thick as ever, and he came at last to the palace, and there in the court lay the dogs fast asleep, and the horses were standing in the stables, and on the roof sat those pigeons sleeping. And he came to the palace. The flies were sleeping on the walls, and the butler had a jug of ale at his lips, and the maid still had a chicken at her lap ready to pluck. He went on still farther, and he could hear each of his breaths. He came to the old tower at the very top. He opened a little door. There was Briar Rose. She lay fast asleep on a couch by a window. She looked so beautiful that he could not take his eyes off of her. He stooped down and gave her a kiss. The moment he kissed her, her eyes opened. She awoke. She smiled upon him. They went out together, and soon the king and the queen awoke, and all the court, and they all gazed upon one another with great wonder. And the horses shook themselves, and the dogs jumped up and barked, and the pigeons shook their head from under their wings and looked about, and they flew into the fields, and the flies started buzzing again, and the fire started blazing, and they had the goose for dinner. The butler finished his ale. The maid finished plucking that poor chicken. And that poor butler boy got his ear cuffed. Well, the prince and Briar Rose were married, and the wedding feast was given, and they lived happily together all their lives long. That's the original story. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun for me. Have a good day. We'll see you again. Bye-bye.